IIPS progress across the continent. I know many of you are road warriors. You get to a lot of the countries and have been talking to folks that are interested in IIPS. Would love to get your input and perspective on what's happening. Costa, I'm going to start with you and explain to us why IIPS can drive financial inclusion.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula. Hello, everyone, again. So IIPS, Instant Inclusive Payment Systems, just a little bit of terminology so we get everyone on board. Why is it important for financial inclusion? There are three basic reasons. One is that IIPSs, by the way they are constructed, are capable of connecting people who are unbanked to an adequate financial system. How do they do that? Essentially by interoperability, providing an interoperable environment where new players like mobile money providers, fintechs, can play an equal role as banks in the system, but they have a very different profile, business and customer profile, where they focus on people who are not necessarily the focus of the banks. Hence, they are capable of serving and including people who are unbanked and making a profit by doing that. So IIPS has enabled first this interoperable environment to exist, and we have talked a lot about, you know, the enlightened central bank governance and regulation to enable something like that to happen. So that's point number one. Point number two, perhaps even more important, and that's what we are seeing unfolding here in Rwanda, is enabling people to live a more productive life. That means that it's not only about being able to make instant payments as a basic mechanism, but for what? For running a small business, for as an agriculture, as a person in agriculture, as a farmer, being able to buy grain and pay for it instantly, by having a microloan and so on and so forth. So that's where the payment platform, the IIPS platform, serves as a platform for many other additional services and use cases to flourish and to serve the many, many different needs of the people who are included. Finally, the third part is, if you look at it from the government perspective, IIPS tend to be a strategic national platform to deliver services to the people who digitally who may not be able to do that. The best example of that we have seen in the COVID era, where governments were able to disburse, some governments were able to disburse digitally various support programs to people, fast, efficient, fraud-proof, and that were much more efficient in doing so. So IIPS is also from the government perspective serve as a very powerful and inclusive tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa. Wally, next to you, I know Africanenda is studying IIPSs across the continent, but let's back up a moment. What's the real difference between an IPS and an IIPS, and why is it so important for financial inclusion to get that extra I?
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you very much for having me speak on this panel. It's interesting that, you know, the question that Paula asked, Paula is an expert in this area, and she's actually published a blog about it, which I will commend to everybody to please read. You know, speaking in terms of the difference between an IIPS and an IPS will deliver the transfer from one person to the other. I like to think of an IPS as not necessarily having a soul, but when you then move to an IIPS will do everything an IPS can do, but also will do a lot more. So therein you begin to see the difference. And IIPS is inclusive in terms of participants, so everybody is welcome. And IIPS is inclusive in terms of use cases and products, so it addresses the needs, demands, and requirements that people really want. And IIPS is inclusive in its governance, so everybody who is participating also has a fair right to speak into it, to comment, to raise concerns, and is involved in the management of disputes. And IIPS is also committed to affordability and cost management. So it takes a lot of things into consideration that ordinarily an IPS may not necessarily be so keen to focus on. An IIPS will ensure that it is inclusive in terms of users. So it looks at different strata. It looks at the bottom of the pyramid. An IIPS will typically focus on low value, high volume type transactions. You can have an IPS that, delivers instant payments between bank A and bank B, and, it's good for the big transactions. But an IIPS, I think, goes to the bottom, addresses the concerns of the bottom of the pyramid. So these are some of the sort of important distinctions that I see between the two. Now, over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of debate in terms of really and truly what is an IIPS and what is an IPS. The conversations will not stop, but I think that very, very clearly the market is able to see and distill very clearly what an IIPS will address. So an IIPS will address financial inclusion. It will have as its primary focus inclusivity. It will address building resilience. It's not just about making the end-to-end payment. It's about building resilience. It's about supporting the bottom of the pyramid. It's about supporting products like insurance, like credit, that also help build resilience of the bottom of the pyramid. Thank you.
Thank you. Wally and Costa both mentioned some attributes of IIPS systems that provide benefit to the end consumer. Are those the same benefits and reasons why countries are considering IIPS solutions?
Okay, thank you, Paula. So you are asking me why country is being interested in IIPS. So first of all, I want to thank the organizer of this meeting. Thank to Good Foundation, Costa, for supporting us. What we learned from the field regarding why IPS is interested by a lot of countries. The IPS support the growth of economy in Africa, mainly in helping them to full achieve the financial inclusion in some countries like Ghana for 80%. And the key driving of IPS is in Africa, we learn, is commitment to improving financial inclusion, boosting economic growth, modernize the digital financial ecosystem. Coming to driving financial inclusion, a country like Ghana, when they adopt the mobile money interoperability launched in 2018, this has enabled transaction across mobile platform, bank to wallet to bank and bank to wallet, and supporting also more comprehensive, inclusive financial system. In Nigeria, we learned that IPS facilitates a real-time interbank transfer, which has driven a robust increase in digital payment across the country. And IPS also supports the government revenue collection. When we introduced the mobile money interoperability in Ghana, this allowed the Ghana government to increase the value-added tax collection. IPS also support the competitive of markets. When they introduce mobile money interoperability in Ghana, we saw that MTN decreased his fees for at least 25%. And finally, the IPS can support the cross-border transaction. We hear this morning the ministry talk about the PIPS from African continental trade area. So this can help to support the cross-border and reduce costs for population. In conclusion, having some IPS promotes economic growth, reducing the reliance on cash and driving financial inclusion, increasing government revenue, and also work to reduce corruption because it's cashless. Thank you.
So thank you. Wally, obviously there's fundamental differences between an IPS and an IIPS. What are some of the challenges in convincing a country to go all in? What are the differences that make it worthwhile for them to go more comprehensive in their offerings?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paula. I think we began to see some sort of a significant shift with the advent of the pandemic in 2020. At that time, I worked in the mobile sector, working for the GSMA as head of Sub-Saharan Africa. And we were in several markets helping lead conversations with regulators and the government in terms of how can we help to make payments now that people cannot go out, cash is no longer an option. How do we optimize the digital rails? And governments were very, very keen to support this at this time. So you then started having conversations around reducing the cost, increasing limits, etc. So there's something we say in Africa that governments are really keen to democratize the benefits of democracy. So a lot of governments have a good, solid interest now in wanting to achieve financial inclusion. So it's very, we're now able to latch on and lead conversations with governments that highlight, one, the social inclusion that financial inclusion brings, the economic inclusion that financial inclusion brings. Governments are very, very now able to relate the benefits of financial inclusion and the day-to-day benefits for the citizen. So in terms of moving from just strictly providing a payment system, I think that, the work that so many of the partners are doing on the continent is really, really driving that. I also like to use a comparison in terms of 15 years ago, when you spoke about mobile phones on the continent, people just thought, oh, it was just for Wale to call Costa and Costa to call Wale. But now we see that the infrastructure that has been built is delivering on financial inclusion, is delivering on data, and so many other things. I also see a situation where governments are also beginning to see the benefits of things like P2G, G2B, G2P payments. Government is seeing the ability and the transparency that it brings, the integrity it brings to the system. So again, using the pandemic and also the amount of displacements we have seen on the continent and the number of refugees and the social handouts and payments being made now, payment systems are being able to deliver that. And again, it's all driving financial inclusion. So I see also that government is also seeing that, look, with financial inclusion, you increase your tax base. With financial inclusion and access to payment systems, people are building their businesses. Payments are a lot easier. They are instant. They're irrevocable. There's trust in the system. So it's really a good time to be involved in driving financial inclusion on the continent now. Thank you.
So Costa, I'm going to pivot slightly here. I know you've been involved in a lot of regional initiatives, like, for example, COMESA. How do the regional systems help accelerate financial inclusion? What influence do they have on at the country level?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, there is this big picture that when we look at Africa, one is the country discussion we just had, and my personal belief and where the Gates Foundation is looking forward is to help every single country in Africa have an instant inclusive payment system in support for financial inclusion and the other benefits that we have mentioned. And here we are today discussing this for Rwanda, but with many other countries here in this room. So that's one very important trust. And we have seen how these instant inclusive payment systems, as Innocent this morning said, are really considered by governments to be digital public infrastructures in the same way that roads and highways and harbors are physical infrastructure, public, in that same way payment systems are there. So that's kind of one strategic movement that we see in Africa, and Africa is leading the way in really innovating on that in that space. Now, the second big strategic thrust that we see is cross-border. Contrary to other big success stories of digital platform deployments like India or Brazil, who have a homogeneous political central regulation system, Africa is 54 countries with many, many currencies. And the cross-border issue is increasingly important for two reasons. One, because of the high volume of remittances flows into African countries from Europe and United States and Arab countries. And secondly, for the regional cross-border payments that occur very locally on both sides of a particular border. And I still want to go and see the most busy border, I'm being told, in Africa between Zambia and DRC. Quite keen to get there and see how the trade is happening there. So that kind of regional driver is as important as the domestic country deployments, because it enables, it kind of pushes the countries forward to deploy instant inclusive payment systems that can be connected to others on a regional basis. And also it enables this cross-border commerce to happen that is really the next innovation in financial inclusion. All this to say, and the last thing I wanted to say, Africa has a number of economic unions, monetary unions, regions like COMESA, like SADC, like CEMAC, like WAEMU, the whole Arab countries in the north with the Buna system. All of these regions are tremendous drivers of digital deployments as well. And that's why we're also involved in on the Gates Foundation side and the Mojaloop Foundation side on helping out these regional projects as well as strategic trust for financial inclusion and economic integration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the other panelists on that?
So what I would add is that what we learned from the field, we realized that the adoption of the digital payment in Africa has grown significantly. And the demand is mostly from P2P, from P2B. And the country is asking for the fully interoperable P2P transfer. The country are asking for that because while we raise the mobile money in Africa, we realize that there is a clear need that can be ignored when designing the IIPS. The first one, in countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Tanzania, where they implemented IIPS that support business. In 2023, the remittance flow into Africa reached estimated to $90 billion. And then there is a full need to support how to leverage in this remittance using IPS system. The second need is to support the G2P. As Wale said, the COVID pandemic demonstrated the essential of relevance to digitalize the services and goods. For example, in Togo, the implementation of Novici, what means all digital, the government to person payment scheme, has contributed to provide resources to people during COVID pandemic crisis. It's critical when we are designing the IIPS to support also the government to person payment. And finally, when we are designing the IPS, we need to design it according to the industry standard to ensure that there can be interconnection between system from country to country. It's basically important to design the IPS system by looking at how we integrate some international standard when we are designing this system. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to make another point that when you look at Africa today, 4 years ago, I probably would have said, oh, we don't need a payment system, a domestic payment system in every African country, because if you look at the numbers for a payment system to be sustainable, there has to be a certain amount of scale. But today, the picture is really, really different. Now, the vision is to have a national or a domestic payment system in every country. And this vision is not a vision that, people have come to place on countries in Africa. It is a homegrown, demanded solution. I think that Africa is also very cognitive of the developments in the world, the political interplay between the East and the West, and more every country wanting to have full ownership of its domestic payment system, end-to-end, insulated from international politics, any disruptions in the world order. So we're seeing this again as a big driver for payment systems on the continent. And at the back of this, financial inclusion is really, really key. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we move on from the subject, I wanted to do, I mentioned cross-border is the next really wave of innovation. And I wanted to do a shout out for two persons here in the audience, Comesa CBC and Comesa CCH. Please stand up we can see you. They are driving innovation for the Comesa region. They are the innovators that they have, they are attacking head on a whole lot of very complicated issues of providing, for example, cross-border liquidity on particular currencies so that transactions are not settled in New York or Frankfurt, but actually locally. They are tackling issues of, how to do instant cross-border payments, even from countries that do not have yet an instant inclusive payment system. So bravo, really, you are driving innovation and for all of us, and please ask them any questions and please help out as a community. Thank you again.
Thank you, Costa, and thank you to the folks from COMES for joining us here this week. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that project as the days progress. So I'm gonna throw you off script a little bit now and ask some questions and put your crystal ball on. We mentioned crypto earlier. Always a controversial and fun topic to debate. But I'll pivot to retail CBDC. What are your thoughts of there being some traction made in the next 3 to 5 years with retail CBDC? Anyone want to comment?
Maybe I can start. I think, first of all, again, some terminology. There is CBDCs that tend to be initiatives supported by central banks. There are also the world of stable coins, which is very connected and which we see also as important. They are important for financial inclusion in two contexts that are kind of behind the scenes. So not directly being not directly seen by the actual users of the system, but more as technologies that enable to reduce risk behind the scenes. And the two domains that we see them being useful are domestic settlement. So today, while an instant inclusive payment system ensures that the money is delivered instantaneously between the payer and the payee, if they are on different providers, that these providers need to settle. And that happens today in a variety of ways, but at best a couple times, 2-3 times a day through some form of commercial banks. That is okay, but it does introduce a whole set of complexity and risk. And CBDCs and stable coins could be one way to reduce that risk and to make the domestic settlement happens real time as well. The second, and this is where more perhaps stable coins play a role, is the cross-border settlement again, but this time across currencies. A stable coin currency can bridge currencies and provide this liquidity that is sometimes very difficult to obtain because a particular currency pair may not be very popular for liquidity providers. So these are the two domains where we see this being relevant. But
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Costa. I just wanted to make a small comment in terms of the way interest has sort of gone up and gone down around this issue. We have seen Nigeria launch. We have seen Ghana also make a lot of progress more recently. I think that there will be room for more countries to go in this direction as we see more successful rollouts. Maybe the cost of development comes down. We will see a bit more progress in this space. Thank you.
Thank you. So last question, and I want to bring it back to the consumer, to the user. We've talked about peer-to-peer as probably one of the leading use cases reaching citizens. G2P being another very compelling use case that became more popular during COVID. What are the next 1 or 2 use cases where you see significant traction? Matthew?
Thank you for the question. For us, the government tax collection, revenue collection can be also the use case. Because in a lot of countries, the government still the big player in terms of providing cash transfer, in terms of also collecting revenue, in terms also of procurement. So the IPS can play a big role in coming here to support the not only the digital public goods or infrastructure, but also to support our government to collect revenue and stop the risk of corruption. Maybe not stop, but lower the risk of corruption in some country. Thank you.
I think, Paula, you mentioned P2P and P2G, G2P. I think there's also a big interest around P2B, even though in Africa we find that there's a very thin line often between P2B and P2P. So, I know from my experience, my tailor, my plumber, my electrician, and these are people who have fairly significant businesses, but when it comes to payments, you pay into their personal accounts. I think this is perhaps from a tax management perspective, but bottom line, I think that as we invest a lot more in P2B and then begin to slap on some of the more sophisticated offerings like QR payments, etc., you will see more and more scale and growth. Thank you.
Yeah, a slightly different take on this topic. We mentioned it earlier as well. Once you have a well-functioning IIPS, it enables these big use cases. But I think the future lies as well in enabling the local ecosystems of fintechs to provide an infinity of smaller niche use cases that are relevant to the people in the town or even in the neighborhood, relevant to them. Savings group support, focused initiatives on farmers, pay-as-you-go facilities, and leave it to the creativity of the people to invent these. And I really encourage Rwanda and others to actually foster this innovation in many ways, because we don't know what people ultimately need. People, I always say, people vote with their feet. They will use something or not. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is not exactly about a use case, but subjects dear to my heart, Minister Paula, Honorable Minister Paula mentioned that there is 1.4 billion people remaining unbanked. These will be the most difficult ones to reach because they are the remotest, the poorest. And I think we need to pay attention to what is it that a person in that category, what is it going to take for them to say, yes, I want to make a payment digitally. And it takes a lot for a person to come in and trust that. And we mentioned many issues. I heard even in Rwanda, the cumbersomeness of, using, because not everyone has a smartphone, the cumbersomeness of using, SMS-based solutions, and so on and so forth. So my challenge really, and that my vision is, what would it take for someone, for a woman, let's imagine that has to pay a tuition for her child. What if rather than imposing all of this technology on her, what is it if she's being told in her language, you are asked to pay for this and this amount, and the only thing she has to say is, yes, I want to do this. What would it take? I think that's the next wave of innovation that I want you to start considering, because that will be what it takes to attract and serve this last big batch of new consumers coming in.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, we did run a little long, and I know we're dipping into the lunch time right now, so I'm going to conclude now. Thanks to all of you for your insights and perspectives. If you have questions for our panelists, we're now going to break for lunch. Simeon's going to give us the logistics, but please give the panelists a hand for their participation.